Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
It is disappointing to realize that so many employees are dissatisfied with their work, and the leading cause is leadership. That takes me to the subject of blind spots in leadership. There has been a lot of research done on leadership blind spots, and it has revealed a lot of them. In this episode, let's talk about these blind spots that lead to patterns of disengagement and self-destruction, and what leaders can do about it. Hi everyone, I'm Sushmita from the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. For this episode, please help me to welcome my guest, Paul Glover. Paul is a performance coach with 20 plus years of experience as a federal court trial lawyer. He's a passionate storyteller who believes in the power of narrative to influence and educate in business, personal life, and even in courtrooms. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Sumitra. I appreciate the opportunity to converse with you and your audience.
Thank you so much for joining me once again, Paul. So before we start, Paul, it would be great if you can tell us a brief about your professional experience.
Well, it's been a journey, as with most people, of ups and downs. For 30 years, I was a practicing attorney in Chicago in federal court with labor and employment law. And because of my personal issues that caused me to go to prison for 5.5 years and lost my law license. And when I got out, I had to make a decision about what I was going to do for the remainder of my career, remainder of my life. Right. And at that point, I decided, as I looked at my skill sets, that I would be a good coach. Come through many of the issues and emotions that people in the C-suite have to take into account and learn to cope with. And based on my skill sets, I decided to become a coach. Started that 20 years ago, and have a very successful national coaching practice.
Right. So you are working with a lot of leaders lately, right? So that is Absolutely. Why we have selected the topic that how can leaders identify blind spots that can lead to the patterns of disengagement and self-destruction. So starting with the topic, Paul, how do you like to describe a blind spot, and what is how do you like to describe a leadership blind spot especially?
Well, blind spots by definition are difficult to see, and we all have them. I believe that they're ingrained in personality and upbringing, and based on those blind spots, we make decisions that are not necessarily beneficial either to ourselves, to our team, or to our organization if we in fact are leaders of the organization. So because they're built in, there is a tendency to not even know they exist. So it's imperative for leaders to go through the process of finding out what their blind spots are and then making decisions about how to not allow the blind spots to cause them to make those destructive decisions.
Yeah, so I can understand from what you said that it is possible for leaders to see their own blind spots, right?
It is. It is. By the way, I never say impossible, because obviously, if you are paying attention, what you see is how people react to your actions, to the decisions that you make. And if you are paying attention and you see that the reaction is adverse, then you are in a position to ask the question, why? Why are they reacting that way? The problem is, because blind spots are so pervasive and so strong, we often don't look at the reaction. We merely go on to the next issue. So it's not possible, but it's extraordinarily difficult. And I find that most leaders, especially with blind spots, because they are very emotional, have a tendency not to pay attention to the reaction that other people are having when those blind spots take control and cause a leader to make a decision.
Right. So what other signs can leaders look for in order to, uncover blind spots that lead to disengagement and self-destruction?
Well, one of them is the team, since most leaders are team, when we look at how the team is performing. because clearly teams are reflective of leadership. And if the teams are performing bad, rather than blame the team members, team leaders need to first take a look at their own performance. And through that microscope, that filter, make some decisions about why they're doing what and why they're doing it in a specific way. So the poor performance or disengagement of the team is normal indication of a leader and the leader's blind spots having that negative impact.
Right. So what is the best way for them to become aware of this blind spots? How can they, gather the courage to see themselves more clearly?
Well, first, that's a great question because of the word courage. You have to want to change before you will even start to become self-aware. And I believe that the first step in this process is being self-aware. That means that you have to understand the need for being self-aware and then recognize that it is going to be hard work. So you have to commit to the process. Once you've committed to self-awareness, you then need to find what I call the fools. Fool in your life is someone who has the ability to tell you the truth about your blind spots based on your trust of them, but their desire to help you. Without that combination of trust and the desire to help, we will not engage in a conversation about our blind spots. Right. But it's up to leadership to find those people. And they're all around us. In fact, some may be giving us advice that we're not paying attention to. So we need to search them out, identify them, give them the psychological safety they need to tell us the truth about our blind spots, and then thank them, be grateful for them in our life, and do something about the blind spots. Once you recognize you have an issue, you need to take some action to resolve that issue. Failing to cause people not to tell you the truth.
So when I was looking for this topic before starting this podcast, I came across the different kinds of blind spots, Paul. So I came across these three actually, the strategic thinking blind spot, then the I know everything blind spot, and the Lone Ranger blind spot, and also the unconscious bias blind spot. So would you like to brief something about all of this?
Absolutely. Obviously, let me take them out of order, okay? Because I think the first one is one that leaders are impacted by, and that is I know everything. Yes. A huge blind spot because first we believe, or leaders believe, that they're required to know everything, and that not knowing everything or not pretending to know everything is a sign of weakness of leadership. That's absolutely not true. And leaders need to recognize that it's impossible to know everything and that they need to stop having that as a blind spot. They need to recognize there are areas where they don't know and therefore need to find out. So that's the first one. And that one has most impact on people because that means we don't listen to anyone else's opinion. We already know and we actually stop people by our words and actions from telling us their opinion or giving us the input we need as leaders to make the right decision. So we make wrong decisions. Moving on to, because they're really good ones, by the way. The Lone Ranger is, I'm in this by myself. There is no team. It is me. And everything is dependent totally upon me and what I do as to whether or not the organization has success. Once again, that's a fallacy. It is a team game. Because it's a team game, there are other players. So we're not in it by ourselves, but we need to understand that often our blind spots cause us not to accept the support of a team. What we do is we become very directive. We just tell people what to do and hope that they're going to do it, when in reality, we need to ask them what we should do. So the third one, the unconscious bias blind spot, Absolutely. We all have those biases, and to ignore the fact that we have them is to allow them to control decision making. And our biases range as racial or sexual or age, all of those into our behavior. And recognizing that they exist is the first way that we're able to overcome bias. And the problem with bias is that they defeat our ability to improve, because we will not allow those around us to participate in a meaningful fashion because we have this bias. We basically discourage people from participating. And the last one, of course, strategic thinking blind spot is, it's interesting that we do strategic planning, and we do that on an annual basis. But then we believe that that the strategic thinking is not a part of that process, because strategic thinking requires that we are to be resilient enough and adaptive enough to change the strategic plan. And we often believe that once we've got a plan in place, we are not allowed to change it. And the reality is that's the inflexibility that defeats most leaders and most organizations. So the concept of being locked into a plan because that's how we came to a decision needs to go away. Flexibility, adaptability, especially in this day and age. If nothing else, the pandemic has shown, or should have shown us, that we need to be flexible about every aspect of how we lead.
Amazing, Paul. Also, the another one that I got was the unconscious bias blind spot. I think that is the most, critical one for leaders.
Oh, absolutely. Again, first, accepting the fact that we have these biases and exploring what they are is important. That, by the way, that's part of self-awareness. If you don't think you have them, you absolutely are not understanding personality or your upbringing. So that requires a very detailed and honest examination how we're making our decisions, especially when they are about other people, and whether those other people, because of their age, because of their race, because of their sex, are allowed to participate in a meaningful fashion. We often exclude people from the decision-making process because of this unconscious bias based on a variety of reasons. If you don't examine why people are not engaged with you, you will not recognize those unconscious biases. And by the way, that's why we have to find someone we can trust who will point them out to us. A coach, mentors. That is a function that they serve. If they are willing to engage with you, they will point out that your decision making is flawed because of these blind spots, especially unconscious bias. But by the way, again, unconscious bias and blind spots, we don't recognize them as existing until we have a reason to. And that requires somebody else so that we do see them, we do it, and then we do something about them.
So leaders, they have to ask people, right? That for honest feedback, isn't it? But that is where I think leaders, sometimes they don't want to, go to people and ask for their opinions. That is where the problem lies.
That's your spot on, because often it hurts to hear about the issues that we that are negative issues and are having a negative impact. It's always easier and more comfortable just to ignore them. When I start coaching engagement with a leader, the first thing we do is do a 360-degree review with the people who report to them, because I need to hear from that group what they see as the leader's strengths and weaknesses, not what the leader tells me they are. And based on that feedback from an input from the team that reports to the leader, I'm able to now talk to them constructively about the areas that they need to improve in.
Improve, right.
Without that, we're not going to truthfully, very few people are going to truthfully test themselves. They need to results from other people and other people that they respect and count on and need support from. That's when it has an impact. And often it hurts them to hear. And you've got to be in a position to make sure that they understand that this is no pain, no gain approach to leadership. You only get better if you know what you have to improve. For instance, communication. Most leaders believe they're fantastic communicators when they aren't. And that's because they believe in telepathy. They believe that if they think it, other people should hear it. And when they get the information back from their team that they are poor communicators, they're normally shocked by that. But that gives you the opportunity to say, okay, let's accept what they have to say as accurate, and now let's work at improving the communication process.
Brilliant. Moving forward, Paul, let's now talk about leadership coaching, your area actually. How can leadership coaching help in the treatment of psychological blind spots in leadership?
Well, and that's based on the person that wants to be coached and the coach establishing a level of trust that says, I am in this relationship because I want you to get better. Coaching should be about improvement. And you say, I'm engaged in this process as your coach based on the fact that I want nothing more for you than you getting better. And that level of trust, and then the opportunity to be objective, collecting the input that shows the areas that need to be improved, the coaching process works. But it's a hard process, by the way. People enter the coaching process because they don't understand. They know they have to get better. Nobody wants to go to a coach if they already believe they're so good they don't need coaching. So once you know you need it, now we have to actually get to where you need it. Because most people don't know the areas, they don't know their blind spots. And the coach, through the interaction and through collecting input from those that interact with the leader, are able to identify those blind spots and then work at helping the leader not only recognize, but deal with them. Because coaching occurs periodically. You're not there every day as a coach. That's not how it works. I interact on an every other week basis, but there's that 14 days where we're not talking unless there's an emergency and someone contacts me. So the concept of leadership coaching is to identify the blind spots, but then put in place a proactive plan for improvement that requires within that 2-week span that the leader not only knows spot is, but has agreed to doing something about it. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we then are able to have a conversation about what did you do and the impact of doing it. Based on that type of a regiment over a period of time, you are able to see the improvement and measure the improvement. And by the way, that's what a lot of leaders need to see. They need to see that there is a return on the investment of the time and expense of coaching. And that, to me, is what's very important at the end of the coaching engagement, to be able to.
So, Paul, you owe a lot of credit for helping leaders to be better and making workplaces happier. Thanks a lot for your efforts and dedication, and especially for the time that you are giving us today. Really appreciate that. And before the end note today, would you like to give some tips to our listeners?
Absolutely. The first thing that I would say is you do need to find your fool, the person that you trust and who cares enough about you to be honest about your blind spots. And then you need to accept that information as being accurate and start to change your behavior. You cannot change your personality, but you can change your behavior. And that requires a structured approach with goals established, time frame established, and then actions that take place on a very regular basis to show improvement. People need to accept this as a process. It does not happen overnight. It takes a long time to change behavior because it's difficult. And by the way, the hardest people to coach are those people who are successful, because we're asking them to change how they do what they do when they've already been successful. And my intention is that we often forget that coaching is about seeing and achieving potential. So wherever you're at now, that doesn't mean you should stop. Potential is more. You need to recognize that you want more, and you need to accept that this requires hard work to recognize and achieve your potential. It's a positive program that requires a commitment from both coach and person who's being coached. So my suggestion is find that person that you trust that is going to tell you the truth, and then set that program in place. Don't be fuzzy about it. Get very, very precise. Identify a particular area that you're going to get better at, you need to get better at, and then put the program in place with the coach so that it happens. By the way, coaches provide accountability. And often leaders don't have that level of accountability because no one is in a position to hold them accountable. They're the leader. This is why an outside coach is able to have impact.
Brilliant, Paul. Thanks for sharing all of this information and all this knowledge to all our listeners. So finally, we are moving to the end of this podcast. Would like to know how our listeners can reach out to you.
Absolutely. Obviously, I have a website that allows contact. It's paulglovercoaching.com. And they can reach me at paulglovercoaching.com with an email. Also, I'm on LinkedIn at Paul Glover Coaching. So anyone who wants to have an additional discussion with me, I'm absolutely always open to that, and would appreciate the opportunity to members of your audience who have questions based off of our discussion.
Sure. I shall put up your contact details in the show notes, Paul. Thank you so much for joining me in the Vantage HR Influencers podcast.
Well, thank you so very much. It's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to both you and your audience.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.